Elizabeth was in love with a man 20 years her junior, a Catholic and a Frenchman. But would the marriage be a real one? That's to say, was Elizabeth, unlike her sister Mary, still able to have children? And Minister Burghley had thought of this problem too, and he'd had confidential discussions with her doctors and her ladies-in-waiting. And they'd all said the same thing, that she was apt to have children even at this day. After just 2 weeks, the lovers were torn apart. Anjou was recalled to Paris after a friend was killed in a duel. He sent Elizabeth 3 love letters tied with pink ribbons before he had even left English soil, calling himself the most faithful and loving slave on earth. Elizabeth, intoxicated with the attention, couldn't wait for him to return. Elizabeth's old favourites were enraged. Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, was particularly jealous.
Leicester is much put out, and all the councillors are disgusted. A close friend of Leicester tells me he's cursing the French.
A pamphlet appeared on the streets of London. It was venomous in its opposition to the match. Elizabeth would be drawn into a Catholic den of idolatry. If she died in childbirth, Anjou might become King of England. Besides, the Frenchman probably had the pox. Elizabeth was incandescent with rage. She ordered that the author, John Stubbs, and his printer have their right hands struck off. Stubbs spoke of his loyalty to the Queen before having his hands severed with a butcher's cleaver and the stump seared with a red-hot iron. Public opinion turned viciously xenophobic. "Hop off, you frogs!" But Tudor England wasn't a democracy. The men whose opinions Elizabeth would listen to were the members of her Privy Council. The council debated the marriage all day. Finally, opinion was split, 50-50, for and against. In those circumstances, the council felt that it could offer the Queen no formal opinion. Elizabeth was genuinely astonished. For 20 years, her ministers had been telling her she had to marry. Now she'd found the ideal marriage, and they refused to endorse it. She took her council's lukewarm reaction as an effective veto on the Anjou marriage. So Elizabeth wouldn't marry her Prince Charming.
She remained extremely sad after the conversation, and was so cross and melancholy that it was noted by everyone who approached her. She's been greatly alarmed by all this.
Elizabeth wrote to Anjou, explaining why public opinion made it impossible for her to marry him.
The public practice of the Roman religion so sticks in their hearts. I beg you to consider this deeply, as a matter which is so hard for Englishmen to bear that it passes all imagination. For my part, I confess there is no prince in the world to whom I think myself more bound, nor with whom I would rather pass the years of my life, both for your rare virtues and sweet nature. With my commendations to my dearest frog.
Elizabeth thought she'd seen the last of him.
I will not leave my prison, save as Queen of England.
Mary, Queen of Scots, had now been Elizabeth's prisoner for 11 years. She dreamed of rescue, and she dreamed of taking her captor's throne. So she became the centre of a web of Catholic conspiracy, keeping contact with her supporters at home and abroad via secret letters. Some of these letters contained encouraging news. Although Catholicism in England had been driven underground, Jesuit priests were being trained abroad to keep the faith alive. The Jesuits were spiritual revolutionaries who were being smuggled into England in disguise. Among them was Edmund Campion, one of the outstanding churchmen of his age. Campion had left the Church of England to become a Catholic, and he had the zeal of a convert. Campion landed in England in 1580, posing as a travelling merchant. His mission was spiritual, to minister to Catholics. He had no plans to stir up rebellion, but he knew that the Protestant authorities would treat him as a traitor.
I cannot long escape the hands of the heretics. The enemy have so many eyes, so many tongues, so many scouts and crafts. I often change my name. Threatening edicts come forth against us daily. I read letters sometimes that tell news that Campion is taken.
Campion had a very attractive personality, clearly. Man of integrity, man of ambition, man of great intelligence. The Protestant authorities viewed him as a dangerous individual because he was so gifted, because he was so attractive, because he had such a great name already in the country from his early days at Oxford and as a member of the Anglican Church. He represented a new kind of religion, not just establishment religion of either sort, if you like, enthusiastic religion, and that's always dangerous. Particularly if you're trying your best, as Elizabeth was, very understandably from her point of view, to form an established church which didn't satisfy anybody particularly, but kept everybody more or less contained and more or less quiet. One thing Campion was not, was quiet.
The Catholic Mass was illegal in England. That didn't stop Campion moving from house to house, saying Mass and hearing confessions. He published pamphlets which challenged the very basis of Elizabeth's church. Elizabeth had met Campion at Oxford 15 years earlier, before he had converted to Catholicism. She had been greatly impressed by him, but she couldn't ignore the gauntlet that he was now throwing down. Like it or not, she had to treat him as the enemy. Elizabeth and Campion actually had a lot in common. Both believed that it should be possible to distinguish between religion and politics. At the beginning of her reign, Elizabeth had claimed passionately that she wouldn't make windows into men's souls, whilst Campion, for his part, insisted that he had no political motives and was the Queen's loyal subject. But in the circumstances of the European Cold War between Protestant and Catholic, the distinction between religion and politics was almost impossible to maintain. After all, Campion was the loyal servant of the Pope, and the Pope claimed the authority to depose Elizabeth. He had already in the 1560s authorised her subjects to rebel against her, and he could and would do so again.